succession plan is always nice to have when it works out, that is. Hello, everybody. I'm Skylar Callahan here on Between the Eers, Monday's episode here on January 15th. And today we're going to touch on some news that hit a couple of days ago prior to the weekend or over the weekend. And that was Nicco Marchiol committing to the Country Roads Trust and announcing his intentions to return to WVU for the 2024 season. This is really, really good news for Neil Brown, for the program, and specifically for Sean Reagan in that quarterback room, who will have to find another starter after next year as Garrett Green enters his last year of eligibility. Not only is this a good thing for the future, but it's also a good thing for the immediate future as well, because as we've seen a couple of times before, Garrett could suffer an injury, and all of a sudden Nicco has to go in there and not necessarily save the day, but keep things above water. And he did a very good job of that in the backyard brawl, in the Texas Tech game, and would have had to have done it at TCU if it weren't for spraining his own ankle that week. But the big thing here is, I'll go both positive and negative. What happens with this whole plan? What if it goes well? What if it goes south? So let's get the bad out of the way first, and we'll focus most of our time here today on the good stuff. So let's just say the secession plan doesn't work, or doesn't go as everyone plans, right? What happens then? Well, that more than likely means that in 2025, Nicco Marchiol either wins the starting job and doesn't perform as well as expected, or he loses the starting quarterback job in fall camp in 25 to either Khalil Wilkins, Scotty Fox, or somebody else. And all of a sudden, you're a little concerned. That's not what you want to have happen, obviously. But if it does happen, you better hope that the reason why he is not the starting quarterback is because one of these younger kids passed him up. Or maybe it's even Sean Boyle, who is about to enter his second year in the program, Charlotte kid. But you hope it's that, and that it's not he wins the starting job, he's not as good as expected, and then you're scrambling to find an answer. And then you kind of hit the reset button and you're out of contention, and all of a sudden you're kind of back to where you were pre-2023. So I don't think that's necessarily what will happen. I don't think that at all. Do I think Nicco's going to be a star? I don't know. I really don't. Haven't seen enough of the kid to make that kind of a judgment. I think it'd be unfair to do so. I think it'd be also unfair to sit here and say he's going to be just as good as Garrett Green and win as many games as Garrett Green. I think that's all unfair at this point. You have to get more reps under his belt, whether it be in the spring game, fall camp, in garbage time against Albany next spring or next fall, excuse me. And even then, you still really don't know what you have, because it's almost like a scrimmage setting. But you can see better flashes, or that you can hope to see better flashes. I think what we saw from Nicco in the past is a little bit of hot and cold. And I think he'd probably be the first one to admit that. Neil Brown has talked about that a lot, how his good is really good and his bad, it's not necessarily really bad, but there's some things that he needs to clean up to make sure that his lows aren't as low as they are. We saw that in the Texas Tech game with the pair of interceptions he had, but he was also really good in that game. He was also really good with his legs. He made a couple of big throws. He's just got to become more consistent. That's the biggest concern for me out of Nicco Marchiol. But again, you could say the same thing about every young quarterback. It's not just Nicco. It's not that I have something against him. It's just that's the stage of his career that he's in right now. He's finding things out. He's getting his feet wet. There's no reason to panic about any of that. If it goes well, however, if it goes well, now we're talking about some serious stuff here because I think everyone kind of looks at this upcoming season in 24 as like the end all be all, just because it'll be the first time since 2018 that this team's actually had a chance entering the year to compete for something more than just a bowl game. I mean, Garrett Green comes back. You have all those pieces around him on at the skill position. You have a veteran offensive line still in place. The defense, you're starting to feel a little bit better about through the pickups that they've had in the transfer portal. And you're like, yeah, you're looking around the Big 12. There's no Oklahoma. There's no Texas. And all of a sudden, Arizona just lost their coach to Washington, who was going to be a preseason top 10 or 15 team. What happens with them in the portal? Like that's a big question mark. And you got Penn State at home this year instead of having to go up to Happy Valley. Like there's just a lot of things that are starting to fall West Virginia's way. And although we're all understandably looking at 2024 as, oh crap, this could be the year that they really make a run, it doesn't have to be just 2024. It can be 24, 25, 26. This thing can really kind of snowball in a good way for West Virginia if Nicco Marchiol works out. And you look at, I think the biggest reason why Nicco has to work out, like there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If Nicco works out, this team, I'm promising, I shouldn't promise anything in today's world, but I would almost guarantee West Virginia gets a playoff appearance in the next 4 years. And I know that sounds maybe a little disappointing or underwhelming to the most optimistic fans on here, but getting in the top 12 is not necessarily a lock. And look, this year it could happen. 100% it could happen. I'm one that actually fully believes it could happen. But you've also got to wonder what this year will look like, and this is part of the succession plan too. What teams will do to Garrett Green now that they've got a full year of tape on him, and how does he respond? How do teams respond? How would not necessarily a full year, but a healthy chunk of tape on Jaheim White and Rodney Gallagher, Traylon Ray, and some of these other young kids that are going to have to adjust to teams' adjustments. That's a big, big question mark that nobody is talking about. If they handle those well, like I anticipate, then they're going to be fine. But that's why Nicco is so important in this thing. Because once Garrett leaves after 24, say they win, worst case scenario, they win 10 games. 10 games total. That's including the bowl game, whatever. That's still pretty damn good. And look, again, you can have your thoughts and hopes and aspirations for a playoff spot, and I'm not going to stop you. You should. This is a very talented team that Neil's got coming back next year. But this is worst case scenario here. If your worst case scenario is 10 wins, and I'm not saying it necessarily is, but let's, for the sake of this video, 10 wins is pretty damn good, especially considering for WVU football, who's typically averaged somewhere between 7 and 8 wins over the last 20 some years. That's not a bad thing. But if you win 10 games with Garrett Green, You've now won 19 games over the last 2 years, and you more player retention obviously plays a big part in this, but assuming you get that whole young cluster of kids back, and that's Traylon Ray, Hudson Clement, Rodney Gallagher, same thing with the guys on the defensive side of the ball. If those guys continue to stay in the program, you're going to have the nucleus needed to get to the college football playoff, and not just get there, but win a game. Maybe win 2 games. Maybe really make a run. That's why this year for Nicco Marchiol is so critical, so important. We saw what 2022 did for Garrett Green. Now, you hope Nicco doesn't get into the game in 23 unless it's in a blowout situation, because this is Garrett's team. This isn't something that, like, you go back to the 22 season and JT was your starter for, how many ever games, and it was just not working out. And then at the end of the season, Neil flipped the switch and said, all right, Gigi, you're going in. You hope that's not the case with Nicco in this situation with Garrett. I don't really think it would be. Garrett's way too proven of a quarterback at this point. He's too much of a playmaker. That's not happening as long as he's healthy. Health is the only concern there. But there's a real legitimate chance, folks. I'm telling you, a real legitimate chance for this thing to really, really soar. Not only do I think West Virginia could make a playoff, not only do I think they could win a playoff game or two, but this could be the start of West Virginia becoming one of the nation's sleeping giants. Again, that is if the plan works. If the plan works, there is no ceiling on this thing. Because you win 9 games with Garrett Green in 23, so you win 10 in 24. You flip the page over, and the plan, the thing works, and Nicco picks right up in 25, and so you win, because of the pieces around him. He's an older quarterback now, so you win 10 or 11 games again. 26 is his last year, I believe, and that's a pretty veteran-laden group at that point. And along the way, your success on the recruiting trail, I would assume, would be exponentially better than what it has been. And it's not that it's been bad at all, but you're going to be getting kids you weren't getting before. You're going to be getting interested kids more. You're going to have more kids interested in your program more than you did in 21 or 2020 or 2019 or 22 for that matter. This has a chance to really be the turning point for Neil Brown and for this football program, to get away from being that 6-7 win team in the Big 12 that every once in a while they just there's the 9-win year, and then you go back to hitting the reset button. You're trying to find your quarterback for a couple of years, and this is the first real chance that we've seen since we go back to 2016, 17, right? Where you had Skylar Howard win 10 games unexpectedly, kind of like how this just happened with Garrett Green, how you unexpectedly won 9 freaking football games in a year you were picked dead last in the conference. So obviously how everyone saw that offseason was, well, hell, we just won 10 games with Skylar Howard. What do you think they'll do with Will Grier? Now, obviously, that situation was much different. They didn't really have any proven receivers going into 2017. That sounds crazy to say, but at the time, David Sills was maybe one of their best receivers in fall camp, and everyone was kind of panicking because they're like this kid that just went and tried to be a quarterback at the JUCO levels is our number one receiver. Reggie Robertson he was a young kid who was one of our better receivers. Gary Jennings, another young kid, unproven at that point in time. Obviously, we knew what those guys would end up being, but this is a much better situation that they're transitioning into than the 16 to 17 situation. So, but it is still a very good chance for this thing to really, really go uphill and for West Virginia to kick down the door. And I don't know about owning the conference because this conference is too competitive from top to bottom. I don't think any team in this newly formed Big 12 is ever really going to dominate this thing like Oklahoma or Texas did for several years. More likely Oklahoma, but there's a legitimate path here for West Virginia to kick down the door and be one of these top 3 or 4 teams in the league every single year. And if you are one of the top 3 or 4 rosters in that conference every year, you're giving yourself a chance. The ball bounces your way a couple of times in a single season. If you got a top 3 or 4 roster, all of a sudden you're playing in the college football playoff. So now I do want to mention though, with the college football playoff, everyone's like, oh, you just got to get the top 12. That's not necessarily the case. Really, it's the top 11, right? Because they're giving a 12th spot to the group of 5, whoever the highest ranked team is out of that. So really, you need to kind of be on the fringe of the top 10. If you're inside the top 10, there's no questions about it. But again, it's kind of like the same rule applies, at least for me, with the 14 playoff. Because if you're hanging around, if say West Virginia got there, let's go back to the 2018 season for just a second. I know we're getting way off path here, but go back to the 2018 season where they got up to number 7, right? Before the collapse. Had they hung around that area for the rest of the year and you get to Selection Sunday and it comes down to, let's say, a 1-loss West Virginia, who their only loss was to Iowa State. They're a Big 12 champ. They beat Oklahoma. Let's just say that scenario played out. And you have a 1-loss Alabama, or I don't even remember the other teams, but let's just say you have a 1-loss SEC team. You're putting yourself in a tough situation because you know what the committee wants. You know what the committee is going to do. The same thing can happen in the 12 team if you're not really comfortably inside the top 10 or maybe even the top 8, right? Because when you get to that 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 spots, someone's going to be pissed off. That's just how it's going to work. It's always going to be like that no matter how many teams you have in the dang thing. But you need to really kind of get in the top 10 early in the year and stay in there, because the longer you've been in there, the more likely it is that you're going to get in there for the college football playoff. But I don't want to go too far off track. I know I've done that quite a bit here today. But the main theme for this episode, again, the plan is in place. You've got Garrett Green for 1 more year. Go ball out, kid. Do everything you can in your last year to try and bring back a Big 12 title and set the standard for West Virginia football moving forward. That way you can pass the torch to Nicco Marchiol, and this thing can really just blossom into something special. And I'll just go ahead and put this out there right now. If West Virginia wins, let's just say 9 or 10 games, or if they get to the Big 12 championship, because there's so many ways that could look like, right? If they do that, for some of you Neil Brown haters, sorry, but he's going to be around. They're going to be throwing some money his way because other teams around the country, other schools around the country, they're going to look at what he's done over these 2 years at West Virginia in 23 and 24, if that happens, and say, what's going on over there? And some of these donors or these upper echelon people at these other Power Five schools are going to look over there and say, "Hey, you want to go check that situation out in Morgantown? Is that guy going to want to leave? Could we get him to leave?" So just preparing you now for those that don't want to see Neil succeed. If he succeeds again in 24, he's going to get the bat. He's going to get a contract extension, and it'll be well deserved one at that point in time. And look, I'm not necessarily right there with you in when I'm saying you, I'm saying the Neil Brown haters. I'm in the middle right now in terms of my trust or optimism with Neil in this program. Probably a little bit more towards trusting the climb. But I think for me at least, I've got to see something twice to really believe that it's an actual thing, especially when there hasn't been concrete evidence of it happening before, right? Because you go back to from the 19 to 22 seasons, and I mean, let's be honest, it was a crapshoot, right? Wasn't very good. So is this 23 season just a factor of a lighter schedule? Is it the ball bouncing your way a couple times, minus the Hail Mary in the Oklahoma State game? So I guess the ball didn't really bounce your way. So check that box. Was it just an anomaly? Or is this going to become what a Neil Brown coached and led team looks like at WVU once he's finally got a quarterback in place? Because the first 4 years, he didn't have one. So, like I've said before, many times before, I tip my hat to him because he overcame a lot of adversity, a lot of criticism. I've criticized him just about as much as anybody. But credit where credit is due, and Neil Brown deserves a whole hell of a lot of credit right now. So we'll see. What do you think about the plan? Is Garrett Green going to win enough games to kind of set the standard? Is Nicco Marchiol going to come in and pick right up where Garrett left off and keep this team toward the top of the Big 12? And then all of a sudden, wouldn't you know it, West Virginia is a sleeping giant in college football. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments, and let me know what you think about Nicco Marchiol and his game. I'm interested to see kind of your thoughts on him right now as we speak, not as the finished product. I want to hear you guys' thoughts on him. If you've been able to catch some of his tape or just the stuff that you've seen in either the spring game or the small sample size that we had this past season. So let me know what you think about Nicco and just the thoughts about having that possibility where Garrett Green does exactly that. Nicco steps right in and he is the dude, and this thing is off and running. So that'll do it for me here today on Between the Ears. I'm Skylar Callan. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube and Mountaineers. Now give us a like as well, and follow us on X at the same handle. You can follow myself at Callahan_. That'll do it for today's episode of Between the Ears. We'll catch you back here tomorrow morning.